My son called me at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been lying awake anyway, the way I do most nights since Arthur passed, just staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the house settle. When the phone lit up and I saw his name, my stomach dropped before I even answered. Mothers know. We always know before we know. Mom. His voice was the same voice he used when he was 7 and fell off his bicycle on Carling Avenue, trying not to cry, trying to sound okay. Mom, she took the kids. I sat up. What do you mean she took the kids? Brenda's mother. She came with Brenda and they just took them. Owen was asleep and they carried him out. I tried to stop them and Gerald, her brother. He shoved me against the doorframe and said if I called the police, they'd file a report saying I was violent. He exhaled. It was shaky. I don't know what to do. I was already out of bed, already reaching for my coat. What's your address? I had visited twice, but I never committed it to memory the way I should have. That was my fault. He told me. Kanata. About 25 minutes from my house in Westboro at that hour, maybe less. Don't call anyone, I said. Don't touch anything. Don't text Brenda. Just sit down and wait for me. Mom? Sit down, sweetheart. I'm coming. I need to back up because none of this will make sense without it. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is. The whole of it, not just a character in a story, is 31 years old. He met Brenda 4 years ago at a work event downtown. She was charming in the way that some people are charming when they are performing charm. All attention and laughter and a particular kind of eye contact that makes you feel like the only person in the room. I noticed it the first time he brought her home for dinner. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being protective in the way mothers are, reading threats where there were none. I should have said something. Within 8 months, they were living together. Within a year, she was pregnant. Within 2 years, they had Owen. And then 18 months later, Rosie. By that point, I had watched my son change in ways that I kept trying to explain away. He stopped calling as often. When we did speak, he chose his words carefully, the way you do when someone might be listening. He lost weight. He apologized for things that weren't his fault. Apologized to me, apologized to waiters, apologized to his own children when they bumped into furniture. Brenda's family had money. Not old money, not the kind that sits quietly. The loud kind, the kind that enters every room ahead of the person carrying it. Her father, Roland, had built a mid-sized construction company in the Ottawa Valley over 30 years. When my son and Brenda got engaged, Roland made it very clear in the pleasant way that controlling men make things clear that my son would be taken care of if he came to work for the family business. Project coordinator, good salary, benefits. What Roland actually meant was, you will work for me, you will be grateful, and you will never forget that everything you have came from us. My son took the job because Brenda asked him to and because he believed, the way good people believe, that the offer was genuine. What I have never told my son, because I did not want it to be the reason he loved me, is that I am not simply a retired high school administrator living on a pension in Westboro. I spent 11 years as a school principal, yes, but before that, I spent 14 years as a corporate lawyer specializing in contract and securities law. I left the practice in my mid-40s because I had watched my own marriage nearly dissolve from the demands of billable hours, and I chose differently. I kept one thing, my stake in a real estate investment partnership that 3 colleagues and I had formed in the early 90s, buying commercial properties across eastern Ontario when prices were low and everyone thought we were foolish. I am not foolish. I also kept my license, though I let it go inactive. It takes less than you'd think to reactivate it. Brenda's family did not know any of this. My son did not tell them because he did not fully understand it himself. He knew I was comfortable, as he put it, but he was raised to believe that money was private, that it had nothing to do with who you were or what you deserved. I was proud of him for that. I was also, on the night I drove to Kanata at 3 a.m., grateful for it. He was sitting on the front step when I pulled up. The porch light was on. He had a bruise starting above his right eyebrow where Gerald had shoved him into the doorframe. I sat beside him on the step. It was early April and still cold, a thin frost on the front walk, and I didn't say anything for a moment. I just put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was small and running a fever. Tell me everything, I said. From the beginning, leave nothing out. It took about 40 minutes. The marriage had been deteriorating for nearly a year, he told me. Arguments that always ended with him apologizing, finances that Brenda controlled entirely, a creeping sense that he was a guest in his own home. He had asked about separating 3 months before. Brenda had told him that if he tried to leave, she would make sure he never had a relationship with those children. He had believed her. He had stayed. Then 2 weeks ago, without warning, Roland had called him into his office and terminated him. Restructuring, he said. My son didn't have a contract. Roland had never offered one, and my son, trusting, hadn't asked. He was handed 2 weeks' severance in a box for his desk. That same evening, Brenda told him she wanted him out of the house. Her name was on the lease. When he refused to leave, because Owen and Rosie were there, because where was he supposed to go? She stopped speaking to him entirely. And then, at 2 a.m., on a Thursday, her mother and her brother arrived and simply took the children while he stood in the hallway, too shocked to understand what was happening until it was done. When he finished, I sat quietly for a moment. Do you still have access to your pay stubs from Roland's company? I asked. He looked at me. I have them on email. Why? And your bank account? The joint one with Brenda. Can you still access it online? Until she changes the password, I guess. Take screenshots of everything tonight. Every transaction going back 2 years. Do it before you sleep. I stood up. You're coming to stay with me. Pack what you need for a week. Mom, the kids. I know. I looked at him. We're going to get them back. But you need to trust me and you need to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? He was quiet for a second. Then he nodded. The first call I made the next morning was to a family lawyer I had known for 23 years. Her name is Patricia, and she is one of the finest litigators in Ottawa, which is not a small thing. I did not call her as a favor. I called her as a colleague. While Patricia filed for an emergency motion for access, the children had been taken to Brenda's parents' house in Almonte, which we confirmed through a quick and legal means I won't detail here. I started doing what I actually do well, which is reading financial documents. My son had forwarded me 2 years of his bank statements, his pay records, and every email he could find relating to his employment at Roland's company. I went through them at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad, the same way I used to prepare for depositions. What I found took me the better part of 3 days to fully understand, and when I did understand it, I sat back in my chair and felt something I can only describe as a cold, clarifying anger. Roland's company, Penneridge Contracting, had been running my son's salary through a subsidiary that, as far as I could determine from the paper trail, was used to manage certain contracts that did not appear on the main company's books in the way they should have. My son had been signing off on supply orders as part of his project coordinator role. He had no idea what he was signing off on. He had simply done what he was told, trusted the documents placed in front of him, and initialed where Roland's office manager pointed. If things went wrong, if anyone ever looked closely, my son's name was on those forms. It was not an accident. I called Patricia again that evening. This is bigger than the custody issue, I said. How much bigger? I'm looking at what appears to be a systematic pattern of fraudulent invoicing on municipal contracts going back at least 18 months. And my son's signature is embedded throughout it. There was a pause. He didn't know? No, he didn't know. He lit at my notes. But Roland did. I want to be careful here about what I say and how I say it, because some of this is still before the courts, and I will not say anything that interferes with that. What I can tell you is the shape of what happened next, because it is important, and because I think other people need to hear it. Roland had spent 30 years building a reputation in the Ottawa Valley as a plain-spoken, hard-working man who did honest work at fair prices. He sat on the board of 2 local charities. He donated to the Children's Hospital. He was the kind of man who got his photograph in the local paper shaking hands with the MP. He was also, I came to understand, the kind of man who believed that his name and his money made him untouchable, and that the people around him, including his own son-in-law, were instruments to be used and discarded. He had not expected me. To be fair to him, there was no reason he should have. He saw a retired school administrator in her 60s, quiet, widowed, living in a nice but modest house in Westboro. He probably assumed I would take my son for tea, tell him these things happen, and encourage him to settle quietly. What I did instead was reactivate my legal license, a process I had quietly begun 2 months earlier when my son first told me about the problems in his marriage. Because I had a feeling I might need it, and I filed a formal complaint with the appropriate regulatory body regarding the contracting irregularities. I also provided a detailed supporting document to Patricia, who knew exactly which additional parties should receive copies. Then I waited. In the meantime, the custody motion had its first hearing. Patricia was thorough and precise. The children had been removed in the middle of the night without consent or legal authority. Brenda's lawyer attempted to argue that my son had been verbally threatening in the weeks prior. There was no evidence of this because there was nothing to evidence, and the judge was not impressed. An interim order was issued requiring the children to be returned to my son's care within 48 hours. I was sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom when Brenda and her mother came out. Her mother, a tall woman with Brenda's same careful posture, stopped when she saw me. "You should stay out of things that don't concern you," she said. Her voice was very controlled. I looked at her. I want to be honest. I felt no anger in that moment. I felt something closer to sadness, the way you feel when you see a situation that has gone so wrong for so long that even the people causing the harm have stopped seeing it. "They're my grandchildren," I said. "Everything about this concerns me." She said something else. I don't remember what it was. I was already looking at the elevator. Owen was 4 and Rosie was 2.5 when my son brought them to my house for the first time after the interim order. Owen ran in through the front door the way he always does, like he's been held back by a starting gate. Rosie walked in carefully, holding the door frame, looking at me with those enormous brown eyes. "Grandma," Owen said, "we slept at Grandma Pollitt's house, and she doesn't have any cereal, only bran things." "Well," I said, "I have the good cereal. Go look in the pantry." I watched my son watch his children, and something in a space that had been tight for months started slowly to loosen. The investigation that followed. I won't overstate my role in initiating it because others were already looking. I simply gave them a clearer picture, resulted in significant consequences for Pinneridge Contracting and for Roland personally. There were findings related to the misrepresentation of subcontracting costs on 3 municipal infrastructure projects in Renfrew County. There were additional findings about how employee records had been structured to create liability buffers. My son's name was entirely cleared, a fact that was documented formally and that I made sure Patricia had in writing before any of the civil proceedings began. Roland's company did not survive intact. I am not going to pretend that I feel nothing about that. I don't celebrate it exactly, but I do not grieve it either. The custody proceedings continued for several more months. I will not detail them because they involved the children, and I believe in protecting them from the weight of all of this for as long as possible. What I will say is that my son has primary residence. He's living in a rental house in Nepean now, a real rental, his own lease, his own name on it. He got a new job, project management, at a firm that doesn't belong to anyone's family. He's good at what he does. He always was. Brenda and he are working through a parenting arrangement with a mediator. It is not easy. These things never are. But my son is speaking in full sentences again. He called me last Sunday just to talk. No particular reason, and we spoke for almost an hour about a book he's reading and whether Owen is old enough for hockey registration and what we should do for Rosie's birthday in September. It was the most ordinary conversation in the world. It was everything. I've thought a lot about what I want to say at the end of this because I think the ending matters. I think we sometimes tell stories like this and the ending becomes about the punishment of the people who caused harm, and I understand that impulse. I feel it too. I would be lying if I said I didn't, but I don't think that's actually what the story is about. The story is about a phone call at 2047 in the morning and a mother who got out of bed. It is about the fact that I spent 40 years building a life and acquiring skills and learning how things work, and that I kept all of it quietly in reserve. Not because I expected to need it, but because I believe that what you know is never wasted. It always finds its moment. It is about my son sitting on that cold front step in Canada in April with a bruise above his eye, and me sitting down next to him, and him finally saying out loud all the things he had been afraid to say because he didn't know if anyone would believe him, and me believing him. That was the first thing. Before the lawyers and the documents and the license reactivation and all the rest of it, I believed him. I told him so. And something in him came back to life in that moment that had been going dark for a long time. If you are reading this and you have a child, grown or small, it doesn't matter, who is in something they can't get out of alone, I want you to hear this. You may have more to offer than you realize. Not necessarily what I had. I was lucky in what I had, but the act of showing up, of sitting down on the cold step, of saying I believe you, get in the car, that is available to everyone. It costs nothing, and it changes everything. Roland once told my son, in one of those offhand comments that are designed to diminish, that my son had no idea how the real world worked. He was right about one thing. My son had no idea. He had been kept from knowing on purpose, by design, because someone had decided that his ignorance was useful. But here is what Roland did not know and could not have anticipated. His son-in-law's mother knew exactly how the world worked. She had spent decades learning, and she had been waiting without knowing she was waiting for the moment she would need to use it. That moment came at 2047 on a Thursday morning in April. I got out of bed. I've been sitting with the story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand. Not because I'm still angry, but because I think there's something in it worth understanding clearly before I put it down. Roland did not fail because I outmaneuvered him exactly. He failed because of the choices he had been making, quietly and consistently, for years before that April night. Every time he treated another person as a tool rather than a human being, every time he used his position to protect himself at someone else's expense, every time he looked at my son and saw only something useful, he was building toward a particular outcome. He just couldn't see it from where he was standing. People who believe they are untouchable rarely can. That's not fate. That's not anything mystical. That's just the plain mechanics of how things tend to go when you build a life on taking from others rather than contributing to them. The structure eventually shows its cracks. It always does. And my son, I want to say something about my son, because I think he sometimes gets lost in the telling of this story behind Roland's collapse and my legal history and all the rest of it. My son is a genuinely good person, not perfect, not without his own errors of judgment, staying as long as he did, trusting where he shouldn't have, but fundamentally good. He showed up for those children every single day, even when the ground was dissolving under him. That goodness was not naive, it was real, and I think it mattered. I think the fact that he had not done anything wrong, had not lied or manipulated or taken shortcuts, meant that when I sat down beside him on that cold step and started asking questions, there was nothing to hide. The truth was clean. We could work with clean. That's the thing about integrity that nobody tells you when you're young. It's not just a moral position, it's a practical one. It is enormously useful when things go badly to have nothing to hide. As for me, I kept my skills not because I was planning for disaster, but because I believe that what you learn is part of who you are. You don't stop being a lawyer because you stop practicing law. You don't stop understanding how contracts work because you're running a school now. I was lucky that what I had accumulated over a lifetime happened to be exactly what my son needed. But the principle holds even when the specifics don't line up so neatly. We invest in ourselves not for some future transaction, but because the person we build ourselves into is the person who shows up when it matters. What I keep coming back to is this. The most important thing I did that night was not call Patricia. It was not reactivate my license. It was sit down on a cold porch step at 3 a.m. next to my son and say out loud, clearly, without hesitation, I believe you. He needed to hear that before anything else could happen, and I needed to mean it, fully, without reservation. I did mean it. I do. The rest followed from that.